This is Travis.
And Nicole.
And we're reading Anne of Green Gables
by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 4. Morning at Green Gables. It was broad daylight when Anne awoke and sat up in bed, staring confusedly at the window through which a flood of cheery sunshine was pouring and outside of which something white and feathery waved across glimpses of blue sky. For a moment she could not remember where she was. First came a delightful thrill, as if of something very pleasant, and then a horrible remembrance. This was Green Gables, and they didn't want her because she wasn't a boy. But it was the morning, and yes, it was a cherry tree in full bloom outside her window. With a bound, she was out of bed and across the floor. She pushed up the sash. It went up stiffly and creakily, as if it hadn't been opened in a long time, which was the case, and it stuck so tight that nothing was needed to hold it up. Anne dropped to her knees and gazed out into the June morning, her eyes glistening with delight. Oh, wasn't it beautiful? Wasn't it a lovely place? Suppose she wasn't really going to stay here. Oh, she would imagine she was. There was a scope for imagination here. A huge cherry tree grew outside, so close that its boughs tapped against the house, and it was so thick-set with blossom that hardly a leaf was to be seen. On both sides of the house was a big orchard, one of apple trees and one of cherry trees, also showered over with blossoms, and their grass was all sprinkled with dandelions. In the garden below were lilac trees purple with flowers, and their dizzily sweet fragrance drifting up to the window on the morning wind. Below the garden, a green field lush with clover sloped down to the hollow where the brook ran, and where scores of white birches grew, upswingingly airing out of the undergrowth, suggestive of delightful possibilities in ferns and mosses and woodsy things generally. Beyond it was a hill, green and feathery with spruce and fir. There was a gap in it where they could see the great gable end of the little house she had seen from the other side of the Lake of Shining Waters. It was visible. On the left were the big barns, and beyond them, away down over green, low-sloping fields, was a sparkling blue glimpse of sea. Anne's beauty-loving eyes lingered on it all, taking everything greedily in. She had looked on so many unlovely places in her life, poor child, but this was as lovely as anything she had ever dreamed. She knelt there, lost to everything but the loveliness around her, until she was startled by a hand on her shoulder. Marilla had come in, unheard of, by the small dreamer. "It's time you were getting dressed," she said curtly. Marilla really did not know how to talk to the child, and her uncomfortable ignorance made her crisp and curt when she did not mean to be. Anne stood up and drew a long breath. "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" she said, waving her hand comprehensively at the good world outside. "It's a big tree," said Marilla, "and it blooms great, but the fruit don't amount to much never, small and wormy." "Oh, I don't mean just the tree. Of course it's lovely. Yes, it's radiantly lovely. It blooms as if it meant it. But I mean everything, the garden and the orchard and the brook and the woods, this whole big dear world. Don't you feel as if you just loved the world on a morning like this? And I can hear the brook laughing all the way up here. Have you ever noticed what cheerful things brooks are? They're always laughing. Even in wintertime, I've heard them under the ice. I'm so glad that there's a brook near Green Gables. Perhaps you think it doesn't make much difference to me when you're not going to keep me here, but it does. I shall always like to remember that there is a brook at Green Gables, even if I never did see one. If there wasn't a brook, I'd be haunted by the uncomfortable feeling that there ought to be one. I'm not in the depths of despair this morning. I never can be in the morning. Isn't it a splendid thing that there are mornings? But I feel very sad. I've just been imagining that it really was me that you wanted after all, and I'd be staying here forever and ever. It was a great comfort while it lasted. But the worst of imagining things is the time comes when you have to stop, and then that hurts." "You'd better get dressed and come downstairs and never mind your imaginings," said Marilla as soon as they could get the word in edgewise. "Breakfast is waiting. Wash your face and comb your hair. Leave the window up and turn your bedclothes back over the foot of the bed. Be as smart as you can." Anne could evidently be smart to some purposes, for she was downstairs in 10 minutes' time, with her clothes neatly on, her hair brushed and braided, her face washed, and a comfortable consciousness pervading her soul, so that she had fulfilled all of Marilla's requirements. As a matter of fact, however, she had forgotten to turn back the bedclothes. "I'm pretty hungry this morning," she announced, as she slipped into the chair Marilla had placed her. "The world doesn't seem such a howling wilderness as it did last night. I'm so glad it's a sunshiny morning, but I like rainy mornings real well, too. All sorts of mornings are interesting, don't you think? You don't know what's going to happen during the day, but there's so much scope to the imagination. I'm really glad it's not rainy today, because it's easier to be cheerful and bear up under the affliction of a sunshiny day. I feel as if I do have a great deal to bear up under. It's all very well to read about sorrows and imagine yourself living through them heroically, but it's not so nice when you've really come to have them, is it?" "For pity's sake, hold your tongue," said Marilla. "You talk entirely too much for a little girl." Thereupon Anne held her tongue so obediently and thoroughly that her continued silence made Marilla rather nervous, as if the presence of something not exactly natural. Matthew also held his tongue, but this at least was natural, so the meal was a very silent one. As it progressed, Anne became more and more abstracted, eating mechanically, with her big eyes fixed unswervingly and unseeingly on the sky outside the window. This made Marilla more nervous than ever. She had an uncomfortable feeling that while this odd child's body might be there at the table, her spirit was far away in some remote airy cloudland, borne aloft the wings of imagination. Who would want such a child about the place? Yet Matthew wished to keep her. Of all unaccountable things, Marilla felt that he wanted it just as much as this morning as he did the night before, and that he wanted to go on wanting it. That was Matthew's way. Take a whim into his head and cling to it with the most amazing silent persistency, a persistency 10 times more potent and effectual in its very silence than if he had talked it out. When the meal was ended, Anne came out of her reverie and offered to wash the dishes. "Can you wash the dishes right?" asked Marilla distrustfully. "Pretty well. I'm better at looking after children, though. I've had so much experience at that. It's such a pity you don't have any here for me to look after." "I don't feel as if I wanted any more children to look after than I've got at the present. You're problem enough in all conscience. What's to be done with you, I don't know. Matthew is a most ridiculous man." "I think he's lovely," said Anne reproachfully. "He's so very sympathetic. He didn't mind how much I talked. He seemed to like it. I think that he was a kindred spirit as soon as I ever saw him." "You're both queer enough, if that's what you mean by kindred spirits," said Marilla with a sniff. "Yes, you may wash the dishes. Take plenty of hot water, and be sure you dry them well. I've got enough to attend to this morning, for I'll have to drive over to White Sands in the afternoon and see Mrs. Spencer. You'll come with me, and we'll settle down what's to be done with you. After you finish the dishes, go upstairs and make your bed." Anne washed the dishes deftly enough, as Marilla, who kept a sharp eye on the process, discerned. Later on she made her bed less successfully, for she had never learned the art of wrestling with a feather tick. But it was done somehow and smoothed down, and then Marilla, to get rid of her, told her she might go off the doors and amuse herself until dinner time. Anne flew to the door, face alight, eyes glowing. On the very threshold she stopped short, wheeled about, and came back to sit by the table, light and glow as effectually blotted out as if someone had clapped an extinguisher on her. "What's the matter now?" demanded Marilla. "I don't dare go out," said Anne, in a tone of a martyr relinquishing all earthly joys. "If I can't stay here, then there's no use in my loving Green Gables. If I go out there and get acquainted with all the trees and flowers and the orchard and the brook, I'll not be able to help loving it. It's hard enough now, so I won't make it any harder. I want to go out so much. Everything seems to be calling to me. Anne, Anne, come out to us. Anne, Anne, we want a playmate. But it's better not. There is no use in loving things if you have to be torn from them, is there? And it's so hard to keep from loving things, isn't it? That was why I was so glad when I thought I was going to live here. But I thought I'd have so many things to love and nothing to hinder me. But that brief dream is over. I'm resigned to my fate now, so I don't think I'll go out, for fear I'll get unresigned again. What is the name of that geranium on the windowsill, please?" "That's the apple-scented geranium." "Oh, I don't mean that sort of name. I mean just a name that you gave it yourself. Didn't you give it a name? May I give it one, then? May I call it, let's see, Bonnie would do. May I call it Bonnie while I'm here? Oh, do let me. Goodness, I don't care, but where on earth is the sense in naming a geranium? Oh, I like things to have handles, even though they're only geraniums. It makes them seem more like people. How do you know but that it hurts a geranium's feelings just to be called a geranium and nothing else? You wouldn't like to be called nothing but a woman all the time. Yes, I should call it Bonnie. I named that cherry tree outside my bedroom window this morning. I called it Snow Queen because it was so white. Of course, it won't always be in blossom, but one can imagine that it is, can't one? I never in all my life saw or heard anything to equal her, muttered Marilla, beating a retreat down the cellar after potatoes. She is kind of interesting, as Matthew says. I can already feel that I'm wondering what on earth she'll say next. She'll be casting a spell over me, too. She's cast it over Matthew. That look she gave me when he was out there and said everything he said or hinted at last night over again. Oh, I wish he was like other men and would talk things out. A body can answer back then and argue with him into reason. But what's to be done with a man who just looks? Anne had relapsed into reverie, with her chin in her hands and her eyes on the sky, when Marilla returned from her cellar pilgrimage. There Marilla left her until the early dinner was on the table. I suppose I can have the mare and buggy this afternoon, Matthew? Said Marilla. Matthew nodded and looked wistfully at Anne. Marilla intercepted the look and said grimly, I'm going to drive over to White Sands and settle this thing. I'll take Anne with me, and Mrs. Spencer will probably make arrangements to send her back to Nova Scotia at once. I'll set your tea out for you, and I'll be home in time to milk the cows. Still Matthew said nothing, and Marilla had the sense of having wasted words and breath. There is nothing more aggravating than a man who won't talk back, unless that is a woman who won't. Matthew hitched the sorrel into the buggy in due time, and Marilla and Anne set off. Matthew opened the yard gate for them, and as they drove slowly through, he said, to no one in particular as it seemed,
Little Jerry Bout from the creek was here this morning, and I told him I guess I'd hire him for the summer.
Marilla made no reply, but she'd hit the unlucky sorrel such a vicious clip with the whip that the fat mare, unused to such treatment, whizzed indignantly down the lane at an alarming pace. Marilla looked back once again as the buggy bounced along and saw that aggravating Matthew leaning over the gate, looking wistfully after them.
I'm Travis.
And I'm Nicole.
And we just finished reading Chapter 4 of Anne of Green Gables.
Thanks for reading with us. Are you ready for the 30-second recap? We'll let you guys go first. On your marks.
Get set.
Go! Excellent.
How'd you do?
Well, we'll find out how Travis does. He gets to go first this time.
Ooh, I'm excited. Okay.
You ready,
okay.
Trav?
Chapter 4. Here we go. Okay.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go!
Okay, the chapter opens with this beautiful recountation, that's not a word, recounting of Anne just enjoying the morning, these beautiful trees outside, lovely Green Gables, we can see it all. Marilla comes in, says, stop your dilly-dallying, we have to have some breakfast, and rushes downstairs in military precision time, 10 minutes, but she forgot to remake her bed. She starts talking to Marilla as per normal, realizes that she talks a little bit too much, sits there very pensively, quietly, names a geranium, what was up with that? And then Marilla and Anne are on their way.
Oh, you're done!
Oh, I should
no.
have been watching.
That's okay. Maybe I'll try to fill in the blanks.
Okay, I appreciate that.
You want to count me in?
Okay. In 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, Anne has just woken up at Green Gables after her first night, and she forgot for a second that they were kicking her out because she's not a boy, so she got to have a beautiful morning looking out the window, seeing a beautiful cherry blossom tree, and she runs downstairs after Marilla tells her to get ready for the morning, and then she realizes that, yep, they're going to be getting rid of her. So Marilla's planning on going to Mrs. Spencer's house and talking to her to clear all of this up, but it's very obvious that Matthew wants to keep Anne, and Anne isn't getting her hopes up quite yet. She really wants to stay there, but she doesn't know what's going to happen. Oh, gosh.
Okay, that was a little too good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was impressed. Okay, so just like last week, we wanted to have a little bit of time for you to have a little bit of a discussion with those you've been reading with and listening with. So we wanted to ask a question. So we found it really interesting, this chapter, how Anne went about and actually started naming the flower and the tree outside of her window. So we were just wondering, what are some inanimate objects in your home that you've named before? Now, inanimate is just not animated, which are things in your house that are not people, not dogs, not cats, not pets, but like a cup or a table or something like that.
Naming a cup. Interesting.
Very interesting.
I'd love to know what people have named things at their house. I think naming a tree is a great idea. Wonder if we named more trees, we'd be nicer to them. On that note, it's been
Travis.
and Nicole. Thanks for reading Anne of Green Gables with us.